Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we're calling this Arnhem Week. But of course, the story of Market Garden is far more than paratroops, and you're probably familiar with 30 Corps and Hell's Highway, which will come up incidentally today. But there's a far wider operation involving the VIII and XII Corps, British infantry pushing into Netherlands and on towards Germany. So to explain all this is World War II TV regular Edwin, who hasn't been with us for a while, but he's here now. So I'll bring him in now. Good evening, Edwin. How are you today?
I'm good, Woody. How are you?
I'm good. So how has it been in the Netherlands this year? Busy guiding season?
Yeah, it's been exceptionally busy this year. More than I actually expected, but that's only a good thing. And of course, we've got the 80th commemorations now approaching, so it's going to be. I think the term we were looking for is mental.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Normandy was crazy, and Market Garden will be crazy, and Bastogne will be crazy. But just before we get into this presentation, I mean, you take people on tours of the wider Operation Market Garden, and but I think people, as I said in the introduction there, they are focused on kind of the very narrow part of it. And I think even with the paratrooper landings, there's certain bits that are focused on other bits that aren't. And yet with Normandy, we do kind of look at all the campaign with more attention on D-Day. But do you think Market Garden suffers particularly from a very narrow focus?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people actually surprised that there were any other troops involved on the British side, land ground forces, other than 30 Corps.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, that's what we're going to put right today. So folks, fire away with questions and comments. But we're going to hand over to Edwin for this. And as he just said to me, we're kind of looking at it from a sort of divisional level. But there are lots of moving parts to this, and it's filling in some much needed information about the wider operation. But we will be doing some good old British Airborne stuff in the days that come next week. But over to you, Edwin.
Okay, and don't worry, there will be some airborne stuff in here as well, because if you talk about the flanking corps, of course, that's directly tied to the operations of the 101st Airborne Division, of course. So we won't be going into the details about many of what the Airborne was doing, but you will see on a couple of maps, you will see the 101st Airborne Division there. So yeah, what we're going to talk about today, Woody, is mainly about 12 Corps and 8 Corps, both corps flanking basically the advance of British 30 Corps on the way to Arnhem and beyond. Also something that not a lot of people realized, that Arnhem was not the ultimate objective. It was further north at the town called Harderwijk, Nunspeet, that roughly that area. But it's not just, as I already mentioned, it's not just 30 Corps advances, it's also 12 Corps and 8 Corps. And they simply put, the task of those corps would protect the flanks of 30 Corps so that the Germans couldn't interfere with operations and movement to the north, in a nutshell. Right. So, and that's what we're going to talk about. And the reason why I think this is an interesting subject is because not only is it not talked about much, which then in immediate interests me. I like to go into those type of rabbit holes, but also because it's very tied to, as I already said, to a lot of stuff that happened to the 101st Airborne Division. And when we talk about the 101st Airborne Division, of course, we talk about Hell's Highway. For those viewers that are less familiar with certain words and phrases, Hell's Highway is typically the part of the route of advance for 30 Corps called the corridor officially, which is, and that part of the route between, let's say, north of Eindhoven and the town of VIII, at the northern end of the 101st Airborne sector. And why the Americans, the 101st Airborne Division, dubbed that part Hell's Highway, that's simply because the Germans kept attacking it time and again, and gain control over that road, either physically by having forces on that road and blocking it, or interdicting movement by fire. And that severely hampered the advance north of British 30 Corps. And of course, it fell to mainly the 101st Airborne Division, reinforced with, you know, elements of the British Second Army, mainly armored units, but not solely armored units, to reopen that road time and again. And I just listed on this first slide here, you know, what actually happens in a nutshell. And I'll leave the details a little bit behind, because it just, as viewers are watching this slide, you can read that for yourself. But what's mostly important in this is that we realize that Hell's Highway was actually closed in total 4 out of 7 days, counting from the time that they started moving north of Eindhoven, specifically moving upwards from Zon, when the famous Bailey Bridge was built. Right, so from that time, the morning of the 19th of September till the end of the operation, which is of course the night of the 25th on the 26th of September, that's 7 days. And as I already mentioned, 4 of those days, the road could not be used to get any troops forward, to get any supplies forward, to get, but also not to evacuate any wounded from north coming back south, or empty lorries that had to go back to pick up new supplies, let alone bridging material and whatnot. And it's a subject that I touch upon, and also other people guiding here touch upon very often. I know Joris, for instance, Joris Nieuwend, he touches upon that a lot as well, because it's one of these, the fact that the Germans have so often control over that road and hampering Allied operations, you know, and including the operations in the north. By that, it's one of the reasons why Operation Market Garden finally is not the success that the Allies hoped for. And of course, we know the British have to be pulled back out of Oosterbeek next to Arnhem. Right? So, and this is just again, this is just an overview, you know, with showing a map and the German counterattacks on specific days, and just to go over that a little bit roughly, so we get an idea. First attack on Hell's Highway is actually at the Zon Bailey Bridge the evening after it was opened in the morning, by a couple of German tanks. That was fended off. That happened late in the afternoon, early in the evening, so that it really didn't hamper the Allied advance too much, as they didn't. Most of the time, I should say, sometimes they did, but most of the time they didn't travel by dark for operational reasons. But on the 20th, they again attacked Zon Bridge, now predominantly with infantry and tanks, you know, hanging back and basically serving as artillery. And for most of the morning until very early in the afternoon, the road is closed for traffic. In the afternoon, it does open up, but if you read the account, especially 44 Royal Tank Regiment, which operated in the area, British unit, they also say, you know, during the afternoon you have to close it down briefly again because of shells passing by, and that was not directed immediately at them, because those were just the battle already was somewhere else, but some of the shells still let's say passed over and, you know, dropped quite near to the road, so they had to investigate that before reopening that road. If you think 20th is very interesting, because, you know, that's the day of the mile crossing. That's the last day, or that Colonel Frost and his 740 men, less even. Yep. Just the 740 men who reached Arnhem Bridge on the command of Colonel Frost. It's the last day of fighting at that bridge. So, and one of the big consequences, of course, on the 20th, immediately in the morning, is that they can't push the boats through from Belgium that they need for the Waal crossing. That's one of the reasons why the Waal crossing was postponed to the afternoon, till the afternoon. Right, there's other problems as well, but this is one of the, you know, just to give an example of how that has.
And it's difficult at this point to kind of unravel which problem is affecting which other problem, is because it's all happening at the same time. And it's, people are wanting to find that single broken link in the chain that is causing market garden to fail, when in fact it's more like a gear where bits are going wrong in different places. You can't always pinpoint it on one, because each one is having an effect somewhere else. That closer there affects the bridge over there, that affects the supplies going over there, that affects the decision to do this, and the German. So it's it starts unraveling in multiple areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, a couple of days later, they really need some troops, 43rd Infantry Division and part of the 50th Division in Nijmegen. You can see it on the 21st. They push it as much as possible. But then on the 22nd, 23rd, the Germans cut Hell's Highway again, now near Veghel, with the massive effect, and we shouldn't underestimate that the British XXX Corps is forced to send 32 Guards Armored Brigade, part of the Guards Armored Division, back south again, instead of being able to operate in the Nijmegen area on the islands to push north. So and even after, when that's cleared on the 23rd, on the 24th, the Germans again attack, now from the west, and again cut the road for about 1.5 days. And the end of the entire story, technically, and then we go, then we leave this scene setting basically and go into the flanking corps. The entire end of the operation is that, in the night of the 25th on the 26th, we all know that the remnants of the British Airborne retreated back across the Rhine at Oosterbeek. But that same night, the remnants of that German battle group near that place called Covering, actually slightly different place, but most books use the word Covering because that's easy to pronounce in the English language. So we just keep that in. They do the same thing under the noses of the Brits and the Americans. The remnants of that battle group also escapes back to their own lines, being nearly surrounded for most of the day. So, and of course, that ends Market Garden. What I didn't include, by the way, on this slide is that on the 26th, the road still needed to be cleared from debris, mines, and booby traps. So actually, the effect is even, a day after Market Garden officially ends. So,
we had the question from Scott about which German units were specifically attacking the road on the map you had a second ago.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. So it's on the eastern side, so on the right-hand side of the road that we can see on the map. It's predominantly the 107 Panzer Brigade, especially near Zonn. They also pop up near Veghel, but are then part of a bigger unit called Kampfgruppe Walter. On the western side, it's partly German Fallschirmjäger, sometimes under wider command of a battle group called Kampfgruppe Chill, or Division Chill later, and also partly by 59th Infantry Division. So I hope that helps, and that's the larger units. In essence, what makes it difficult is that these German units, the composition changes almost daily. So it's sometimes very difficult to keep up who's who in the zoo and who's subordinate to whom. So, but this is the general. This is the gist.
Thank you.
Okay, so when you look at that, immediately the question pops up. Of course, why could the Allies not sufficiently protect their flanks? Given the fact that there's not just 30 Corps advancing, it's also 2 other corps, and when we look at those corps, and first of all, let's go into the makeup of these units. So what we see on this slide, that's the 3 different corps that are attacking during Operation Garden. Of course, the middle one we all know about. That's 30 Corps on the command of Generals Sir Brian Horrocks. Guards Armored Division, and has the 43rd Wessex Division in it, with under command the Dutch Princess Irene Brigade. I put them in there because I know that some people might ask a question, especially if you know a little bit about that the Princess Irene Brigade was involved in Market Garden, but they were basically subordinate to the 43rd Wessex Division for this operation. They were not acting independently, and the 50th Northumbrian Division. So on their western
one could argue are kind of on their last legs. It came up in the discussion with Alan Allport later that they've been fighting since Sicily and Malta and Normandy, and they're kind of coming to the end of their sort of shelf life in a sense. They're fighting well, but they're worn out, aren't they? Of all the units on that list, they are probably the most worn out. 7th Armored, you can argue the same. 15th Scottish have been in since Normandy. Guards Armored since Normandy, but there's both a combination of experience, but also fatigue. Just looking at that from a kind of an overview point of view.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you should mention that, Woody, because of course, by this stage in the war, the British are basically scraping the barrel for because a lot of losses of infantry, and in the infantry, certain other units are retrained as infantry to make up for the losses. But what not a lot of people also realize is that by this stage in the war, the decision has already been made to disband a couple of infantry divisions. And the one in northwestern Europe that's being slated for being disbanded is actually the 50th Northumbrian Division. Exactly. So by this time, they technically those plans are already being set in motion, I would say.
The question came up that because they're kind of at full strength, these units, but maybe the caliber of the replacements is not what it had been earlier. I mean, even the Guards Armored had a draft in from the RAF regiment or something, didn't they, to make up their numbers? So the numbers are there, but not necessarily the same kind of caliber and lengthy training that guys would have been having 6 months or a year earlier. So it's sometimes that the numerical strength of a division doesn't really convey the effectiveness of that division.
No. It's a combination, of course.
Yeah,
and it would be, I think, just a couple of weeks after Market Garden ended in the Netherlands, that's actually the 50th is disbanded, and some of these guys are going to be, let's say, reinforcements for different other divisions. So they're being parceled out. And the division itself and subunits of it are being, I think they go back to the UK to become a training division. And that's technically the end of the war for the 50th. Right. So a bit of a sad end, I always think, of a division that has been through so much in the war. But I fully understand that those decisions needed to be made because of the, the manpower problem. So anyways, to the western side, you've got the British 12th Corps on the command of General Ritchie, comprised of the 15th Scottish, the 53rd Welsh Division, and the 7th Armored Division. And then on the right-hand flank, the eastern flank, we got 8th Corps on the command of General O'Connor. And you can see 4 units there, the 3rd Infantry Division, 11th Armored Division. Those are the ones that actually matter for this operation. They also had under command at that time, or at least when Market Garden is being fought, the 4th Armored Brigade, an independent armored brigade, and the Belgian Brigade Piron. But I just mentioned them because they were under command of the 8th Corps. But they're not really coming into that story because they needed to cover part of the extreme right flank. So they basically were stationary somewhere in Belgium. And so we won't be going much into their exploits. So, okay. So what is interesting is just to have a brief look what the situation actually is on the 10th of September 1944. And why did I choose the 10th of September? Because that's the day, of course, when at noon in Brussels, Montgomery and Eisenhower have that famous meeting, famous for several reasons, but the most important in this context is, of course, it's when Market Garden gets to go ahead. And if you look at the units that needed to attack, and specifically the divisions, and you look at this little map here, you can see that they are widely dispersed.
Yeah.
You can see that the 7th Armored Division is still west of Antwerp, and even in Gand. Part of them is in Gand, in Belgium. 53rd Infantry Division, the Welsh Division, has just arrived at Antwerp a day or two before. The 50th Division is a little bit further to the east. They are already part of 30 Corps. They are fighting in just across a canal near a Belgian town called Geel, or Geel, if you pronounce it in an English way. They just have a small bridgehead there, but it's a lot of fighting going on there. And then a little bit further east, you have the Guards Armored Division and some elements of the 11th Armored Division. Other elements are in reserve, and they're fighting near in the area of the town of Hechtel. But if you just keep in mind the units that we just mentioned, all the units that we just mentioned, you know, a lot of units are not even in the area. The 15th Infantry Division is actually closest, and they are, you know, just the bottom left corner, just into Belgium. I think the 50th. The 50, just the 15th Infantry Division, the 51st Highland Division, which wouldn't be part of Operation Market Garden, they come in, but just after Market Garden. They are still at this point, 10th of September 44, with the 49th Infantry Division at Le Havre, attacking Le Havre. So they're still back in Normandy, and the same actually applies also for the headquarters of VIII Corps and the 3rd Infantry Division. They are a little bit east of Rouen. And why? And not just those, also the 43rd Infantry Division, the Wessex Division, is also a little bit east of Rouen in Normandy. And why are those units there? Because they've been stripped of their transport. They're grounded. And that has everything to do with the very quick advance northwards and eastwards after the breakout of Normandy, after the Valais pocket and the crossing of the Seine. And I think probably Alan talked about that as well.
He did. He worked out that the miles per day the Great Swan did going up after Normandy was greater than Guderian's Blitzkrieg in 1940. So kudos to the Canadians and Brits and others for doing that. But that amount of distance in that amount of time puts a big strain on vehicle repairs and engines and transmissions and gearboxes and fuel.
Oh, I'm very happy that Alan looked into that, especially because he's such an eminent historian. Because one of the things I also do is I regularly give lectures on Viking cruises, you know, just docked on the river somewhere in the Netherlands, maybe Nijmegen, and talk about that 1 hour, including Q&A, about the liberation of the Netherlands from, you know, September till 44 till May 1945. And one of the things I always say in the beginning that, you know, during the Great Swan, or the American equivalent of it, the Allies were quicker than the Germans were during the Blitzkrieg. So technically, we outblitzed the Germans, and not a lot of people realize that. And of course, that comes with a lot of problems. I read an account by a guy from I think the 11th Armored Division, that actually captured Antwerp on the 4th of September. And that account was really interesting because he's actually part of the workshop units with this 11th Armored Division. They're still back somewhere in Normandy. They drive up in the days after the 4th of September, and he describes in his diary that he saw left and right going up from Normandy all the way to Antwerp, left and right everywhere, broken lorries, broken tanks, you know. And it's so much stuff to repair. So, you know, one of the big controversies, of course, why didn't 11th Armored push onwards into the Netherlands, cut off the Germans at the Scheldt Estuary? Well, maybe because they didn't have that many tanks and lorries anymore. Maybe the guys were also exhausted by that time, which they probably were, because tanks are not built for comfort.
Yeah.
So
it's a big factor. We can invite you back because we're doing a Shelt a couple of weeks later in the year. You can come and do something about that as well if you'd like to, because you know, a few weeks of intensive movement for either an infantry division or an armored division just put strain on stuff. I mean, I owned a World War II truck, a Morris Commercial, and you know, you're meant to service it, you know, every sort of 200 or 300 miles, a full service, and they've done this in a few days, some of these units. So these vehicles technically need to be stripped back down again, complete gasket changes, new oil pumps, new air filters, all that kind of stuff there. And Ian said in the sidebar, there isn't a shortage of transportation in the sense that the UK has lots and lots of trucks and lots of spares, but everything still has to come from Normandy. Everything still has to go onto a ship somewhere in Portsmouth or Southampton, go across, be unloaded. It's got to be waterproof for the journey across, de-waterproof, and then it's got to be brought either by transporter or driven up to the front, and that just takes time. I mean, the Allies are better at it than the Germans, but it still takes time.
Oh yeah, and of course the entire infrastructure, especially in France, has been bombed to smithereens prior to D-Day. So it's not just that you need to get your fighting equipment in; you need to get rails in, railway tracks, beams, bridging material to build proper bridges, oil pipelines, locomotives, wagons. Everything needs to be brought in. And before that can be repaired, and the big surge forward, of course, the further they get, not just the Brits, but also the Americans, the more petrol they spend on getting the supplies forward in the first place.
Yeah. So that's the thing. That's the thing about the Red Bull Express that we big up all the time, is it's burning 60% of the fuel it delivers. It burns delivering the remaining 40% or something like that. And the speed the Allies are moving at now compared to the slowness of the attritional stage of the Normandy campaign is covering the distance on the ground, but it's also, as we said, putting this strain on the repair, on the workshops, on the REME. But we're going into a massive rabbit hole about
it's an interesting
it's a fun one to do. But
we might do that at a different time, maybe in some kind of a context. Talk about the problems of the Great Swan and the logistical problems.
Let's do it.
And it's massively important to understand not just Market Garden, but also the Battle of the Scheldt Estuary, the Hurtgen Forest, Patton near Metz and Nancy. It's massively important to understand those autumn battles and why things did or did not succeed anymore. But let's digress for now. But that's also basically what happened with VIII Corps headquarters and the 3rd and the 43rd Infantry Division. All right, so and if you then look at the rough outline plan of Operation Garden, Market being the airborne bit, so we're not concerned with Market at the moment, just Garden, and it roughly looks like this. And I say roughly because this is not an official diagram. It's not. It's something I came up with just to give people a little bit of an understanding how it would have looked like. So. And I based the front line, by the way, that's the red line, as you can see. I based the front line where the Allies were on the 17th. All right. So, and as you can see, if you quickly go back here, they moved on the eastern side, they moved up a little bit, gaining a small bridgehead again over a canal south of Turnhout near a place called Ten Art. And this is 15 infantry divisions, 15 Scottish division stuff. They have a very tiny bridgehead here, but that's the logical place to start that operation for 12th Corps, which is responsible for that area at that time, because you not only got that bridgehead here, but from that bridgehead you've got a good road going north towards Turnhout, from Turnhout to Tilburg. and then you either go to Breda or towards Rotterdam, Rotterdam, basically going that direction, or to 's-Hertogenbosch, which is roughly where they need to go. I say either or because if you read some of the plans, they just speak about the first phase, and it's going towards Turnhout and the wider area surrounding it, and then possibly push northwards if required and if possible. But they don't exactly say where to go then, so it's a little bit of a guess there. On the eastern side, you see VIII Corps that has to come up within 7 days after the plan has been okayed, 6.5 actually, and they have to force a way across the Eskoud Canal because there is no bridgehead, and then start moving northwards, roughly towards the town of Helmond, roughly, and then also, if required and if possible, then go further, roughly into the direction of Nijmegen, towards the Maas River, technically. And that's then, of course, to protect VIII Corps from both sides, right? So this is the big idea that they have, and as it will play out, we'll see over the next couple of slides, is that surprisingly, and I say surprisingly because because VIII Corps was the last corps to start attacking, and but they after initial problems, they actually were pretty spot on considering their end objective, what they actually gained. 12th Corps on the left, less so, and as we will see, is that 12th Corps actually didn't use the Tannat bridgehead, but shifted east, more closer to 30 Corps to force a crossing. But we'll go into those details in a minute. Right. So considering that, what you need to do to start the operation with everybody, getting everybody in place, all the 3 corps in place, all the divisions and subunits and attached unit in place. What transpires then is a massive, time-consuming, what I always call a sliding puzzle. And I think that's a British word for it, that you have to got this picture and you've got one part missing and you have to slide these things back and forth to get into place, everything into place. It always reminds me a little bit of that, what happening. So in order to get everybody to the right into the right area, first of all, what they need to do, they need to release 7 Armored Division west of Arnhem. And to do that, they have to shift the Polish 1st Armored Division, which is part of the Canadian Army. They shift them east, take over the 7th Armored Division, having an extended front line at that time, partly also taking over by the 4th Canadian Armored Division. So this is all west of Arnhem, in order to make sure that the 7th Armored Division is relieved and can start moving eastwards. Then the 15th Infantry Division comes up from south of Brussels and relieves the 50th Infantry Division, because the 50th Infantry Division has to secure the start line for Operation Market or Operation Garden, secure the bridgehead that they've got there near Neerpelt, and also follow up behind Guards Armored Division as the attack is going in, and clear the woods. It's a lot of woodland over there that needs to be cleared. So that's the task for 50th Infantry Division. So they need to shift east in order to make that possible. The 15th Infantry Division needs to come up, take over the area, and then even further away, even further to the south. We're going all the way back to France right now, Woody. We've got the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division near Dunkirk and in the wider area around Dunkirk. Now, why is that important? Because Dunkirk is still held by the Germans, and you can't just leave them there. And the 2nd Canadian Division needs to go up to Antwerp to take over from the 53rd Welsh Division, But in order to relieve the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division at Dunkirk, the 1st Special Services Brigade needs to come up from Normandy to take over from the Canadians so that they can go over to Antwerp to take over from the Welsh.
It's easy to do this on a blackboard, much harder to do it in practice, isn't it? You know, you just a bit of chalk, right, we'll move them over there, take them to put them in behind there, and then they'll go in there to find that. Easy to do in that theoretical situation, much harder to do on the ground. Again, all that movement is also, again, taking time, using fuel, putting pressure on trucks, transport, everything else, logistics. It's
and what do we do? Going to move forward supplies with this, or are we going to move those troops now with this transport? Because it's, you know, it's you can't choose both. So those are quite difficult decisions to make. And you know, it's easy to talk about all of this. You know, Unit X relieves Y, and it moves up to relieve Unit Z and whatnot. But if you just think about it for a couple of seconds, the amount of staff work that goes into that, it's just massive. It's an incredible undertaking. And you know, even though Market Garden didn't get the Allies across the Rhine as we hoped for. And I think that the staff work that was carried out by by the Second Army, by the different corps and by the different divisions and lower staff, I've never been in the military, but I would guess that there's quite some excellent staff work going on there. That's quite, you need to be quite professional about this.
Yeah,
it's very easy to mock up, and I don't think we will be able to do that today. But I'll leave that judgment to modern day soldiers.
Yeah, this was put together. I always, because I'm a Normandy guy, compare everything to Overlord, which has a year and a half essentially of planning. This is put together in a week or two of evolving from previous plans, just like Anzio and Salerno. They're all put together very quickly, but this is really, really complex. And also obviously happening under a thick protection of security as well, because staff officers can't be told everything of what's happening in every single other unit, because the danger of word getting out, because you're still on within Europe. There are still potential people out there who can hear this information pass. So it's a security nightmare as well as a logistical nightmare.
Yeah. And
it's
very good for you that you pointed that out, that it's the time frame in which it'll take place, because if you talk about the airborne part, of course, what they did is copy and paste of previous cancelled airborne operation. Right, there's so many documents around there that say Operation Lunette. That's then scratched through, and they put market on it. And not just the operational plan, or Comet and then mark, and not just the operational plans, although the loading tables for the gliders and the planes that deliver the paratroopers. They reuse a lot from plans that didn't go forward. But this is something new, because up till then, they didn't conceptualize the movement on this amount of troops going northward in that short a time frame.
Yeah,
but
airborne troops, by the nature of what they do, they're thinking of things more of a sort of a regiment and battalion level, where in a sense their plans don't really change much from operation to operation, because you've got kind of there's a basic kind of airborne concept. You jump out of an aircraft, you hit a drop zone, and you've got an objective somewhere within a few clicks. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that is comparatively easier to get your head around, rather than the complex bringing up an infantry division to push its way with other divisions to its left and right through canals, over rivers, past forests, on limited roads, with limited transport and logistics. I mean, you can't compare the two in the complexity.
No, it's completely different beast. And both of them have their own challenges, specific challenges, of course, and difficulties. But it's a completely different beast. Okay, so there's a reason why there is a white space in between the first couple of bullet points in the latter ones, is because the white space that basically is, let's say, the top part is what happens. Actually, it all happens before Market Garden starts. The 4 points below happens as from the 17th of September. So even what we see here, that a large part of that sliding puzzle still has to be solved. They know how to do it, but they just have to execute it, and the execution takes a lot of time as well. But so they're not even halfway through actually solving it, actually, carrying out the solution when Market Garden already starts, because the 2nd Infantry Division, Canadian, takes over Antwerp. And
I mean, the equivalent would be you're starting to land the troops on one of the beaches in Normandy when you're still moving other divisions in England across to the port they're going to be taking off from. That would be the equivalent, wouldn't it? Be you've already started one bit, but you're still shuffling.
The old first wave, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's not the follow-up divisions; it's the first wave.
Yeah, the first wave. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That's a good way of comparing it. Crikey, yeah.
That's how we should compare it, because there's follow-up units coming, and there's nothing wrong with that. That they are still in transit, but it's the guys that have to go in first. They're still in transit, which is this is
You're not painting a very positive picture of the Market Garden plan today, Edwin. I have to say.
No, maybe not, because but I'm a historian. I can only analyze.
You can only deal with analyze it with what you've got. Yeah, at this point, it seems very unwieldy and complicated, and lots of moving parts. But anyway, it's fascinating. People loving this angle.
Yeah, but I think also for our viewers, it's very important to keep realizing, as I also point out time and again during those Viking lectures that I do, keep realizing, please, that by the time Normandy ends, the Allies basically think the war will end very soon. The German army collapsed. We got them on the run. They won't be able to resist anymore, other than token resistance. It's just chasing them back into Germany and awaiting the complete collapse of the German army while putting pressure on them. That's also one of the reasons why Eisenhower, I think, goes for the white front thing, because you keep pressure on everybody. You don't allow them to breathe, right? So, and everybody, and literally everybody, soldiers, politicians, civilians alike, they all expect the war to end quite soon, and not without reason, because if you know anything about the end of the First World War, what happened in the latter part of 1918, when the German army did collapse, it's not that dissimilar. What the Allies saw, what was happening, at least not, on the surface. Underneath that surface, it's completely different. But and that's of course the big mistake they make. But everything that happens here is trying to push forward. And again, I would like to stretch that it's not just the British, it's not just Montgomery, or it's also the Americans that are pushing everywhere. The Aachen, Hurricane Forest, northern France, and it's actually also Eisenhower who defends that he keeps pushing his armies beyond. Literally, he states to his superiors, so the combined chiefs of staff, Marshall and Ellenbrook, he wants to keep pushing, even though he is quite aware of their logistical problems. He wants to keep pushing because he wants to get past the Siegfried line and have multiple, not just one, multiple bridgeheads across the Rhine before he stops. Because he thinks he can do it, and because he's very concerned that if he stops short of either one of them, the Germans will dig in again, and he'll have a second Normandy on his hands, and he wants to avoid that. Now we have the benefit of hindsight here, Woody, that the Allies would never be able to do that because they were already past what you would call in technical terms that culminating point. They should have stopped their operation. They should have regrouped, get the logistics in order, and then start pushing forward. That might have been the better option. But back then, with all that that's happening, I think they just pushed it and, just gambled it technically. So, yeah. And you get into these type of situations then. So just to go quickly through it, his 2nd Canadian Infantry Division takes over Antwerp, relieving part of the 31st Infantry Division. The 3rd Infantry Division, by the time Market Garden starts, is still in Normandy. They motor up on the 17th and the 18th and the 19th. And the 7th Armored Division has at one point to take over from the 15th Infantry Division, and then has to wait for the 49th Infantry Division, which also has to come up from Normandy, before they can be ready to get involved themselves. And if you look at this from a slightly different perspective, what was readily available on the 17th of September, and I'll give it a color code, green being it's fully available for, there's no ties. If they want to use it, they can use it. It's orange if they can partly use it because they're partly tied up somewhere else. And that's technically the 53rd Wales Division. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's the attacking brigade that is actually still tied up somewhere. And 3 of those divisions are, for reasons of geographics or for reasons of being tied up somewhere, not able to start operations in the context of Operation Garden on the 17th of September.
Wow. I mean, that is very revealing, that diagram. I just said it in the sidebar there. And again, because the questions came up, why aren't the British putting roadblocks on the flanks? Why is there no protection coming on there? Well, you're beginning to answer it. We haven't even engaged the enemy yet. If you're not ready to actually engage the enemy and push forward, you haven't even got to the point about what the enemy's strength may be and whether or not you can achieve what you're supposed to. You're not even in place to do it. And again, connecting this to Overlord again, not only were all the assault divisions ready to go on June the 6th, about the next 2 or 3 days, 4 or 5 days worth of divisions were all ready to go, fully equipped, fully supplied in their camps, right by the ports. So for Overlord, there's like a week of stuff already, all just waiting to go across, and yet this, just over half is actually ready to go on the first day. That's insane.
Yeah. And there is, I think, also an alternative reason I haven't addressed yet why they try this, why they're pushing this. And I don't have a slide for this, so I have to do this a little bit, just by talking, but bear with me, please. As the Allies are moving up from and specifically the Brits and the Canadians and part of the first US Army, as they are pushing up into Belgium, the Belgian front basically splits up. And part of it is going... and probably have to do this now in mirror. That's reminding myself because of the viewers. The German 15th Army is going a little bit, they're going towards the North Sea coast, technically, west of Antwerp, being bottled up at the Scheldt estuary, or not so much bottled up, but pushed into that direction. And the other German army is basically pushed east towards the Belgian town of Liège and Maastricht, into that general direction, and Aachen, but not as far as that. And then a gap opens, and that's the gap basically between, that pushes you towards Eindhoven, Nijmegen, Arnhem, and different other places as well. But and if you look at the run-up to Operation Market Garden, prior to Operation Market Garden, there was a smaller version of that operation called Operation Comet. And Comet was just about... Comet was basically just the British 1st Airborne Division, plus the Polish Independent Parachute Brigade, dropping at Arnhem and at Nijmegen. No involvement of the Americans. and then British 30 Corps alone pushing up to link up with that division at Nijmegen and at Arnhem, getting across there. Now, Comet had been postponed once or twice, and then it was cancelled early in the morning on the 10th, the same day that Operation Market Garden is getting to go ahead. So we could say, Market Garden is basically an enlargement of Comet, or to put it otherwise, it's Comet 2.0 or Comet on steroids.
Yeah. But with Brereton's involvement more so than Montgomery's, which we're going to be talking about in a future show in a few days' time, and will be, in fact, James Daly's coming on to talk about Linnet and Comet and how they morphed into Margot. It all connects. So we're trying to cover this from all angles on the channel. But
that will be excellent.
Fascinating stuff.
I'm looking forward to hearing him talk about that. But it's not just an enlargement of the airborne part, it's also an enlargement of the ground forces part, because it's now for Market Garden, or for Garden, it's not just British 30 Corps that gets involved, but also 12 Corps gets more involved. And British VIII Corps has to be brought in to protect those flanks. But the thing is that even though there's a gap, one of the reasons why Comet was postponed first and then gets cancelled is because increased German resistance, because the Germans are plugging that gap. So from that perspective, the longer you wait to get ready and get all your troops forward before launching Operation Market Garden, the more time the Germans also get to reinforce their defenses. And with the thinking that the Germans are on their last legs and nearly completely broken, and we got them on the run, quote unquote, it doesn't make that it makes a little bit of sense, at least I think, that they start that operation, pushing 30 Corps already north while the flanking corps are not completely ready. Just go, put the pressure on, go. So having said that, one last thing we have to go into, because before we go into a more day-to-day kind of thing, there's other challenges to deal with as well. A couple of general points and a couple of specific points for each corps. We already covered this part of it: shortage of transport.
Yep.
That's the reason why some of those divisions have been grounded. Their transport units they haul stuff for getting supplies forward towards forward depots and whatnot. But also that when the two corps launch their part in Operation Garden, they have no bridgehead or no usable bridgehead. And why do I say no usable bridgehead? Because the 15th Infantry Division, even though they had a bridgehead at Senart, which I already mentioned, the Germans got them bogged down there. So it's actually of no direct use, meaning that while 30 Corps, when they started Operation Garden, they already started it from a bridgehead across a large east-west canal in Belgium called the Escaut Canal. Yep. But both the other corps will have to fight to get a bridgehead in the first place, which complicates matters quite
just a tad, just a little bit. Yeah. A little
bit, especially if the Germans mind them come across. But right, so and then once you get that bridgehead, you get bridges across. You have to build those bridges as well, and that takes time as well, right? Before you can actually start pushing north. More significantly, there are especially in the 12th Corps and 8th Corps, specifically in the 8th Corps on their eastern flank, there are very limited northeast or north-south roads in that area back in the 1940s. And most of those roads that are in that area are dirt roads. So keep in mind, it's September. It's not midsummer where it's weeks on end it's dry. And if it rains, you know, the ground absorbs it really quickly. It's much wetter. You're in a country which is generally waterlogged. That's why we have the ditches, the canals, the windmills, this, that, and the other. So you will encounter on dirt roads quite a bit of mud very quickly. Right, that is a concern. And of course, what we also need to realize that there are in that area, but that also applies generally to the 30 Corps, a couple of east-west roads and railways, which are very important to the Germans for their lines of communications. The Germans will fight tooth and nail to keep control over those roads and railways, because it's so important for them, especially for the troops that are still in the western part of the Netherlands. Right, and then of course there's a couple of specific challenges for both 12 Corps and 8 Corps as well. But I reckon that most people have read through this slide by now, so let's crack on that one. Right, so
we did have a question earlier that I think we should just address at least briefly about air power. Scott said, maybe jumping ahead, but can Edwin talk about what, if any, air support the Allies received for this part of Operation Garden?
Oh, that's almost another complete presentation.
I know. Just sort of in a summary, just in a sentence.
In a summary, right? So, problem with air support, close air support, that will be 2nd Tactical Air Force. 2nd Tactical Air Force has to support both British 2nd Army and Canadian 1st Army.
Yeah.
Most of the Canadian 1st Army is, or basically all of it, it's strung out from Le Havre till south of the Scheldt Estuary, and by Market Garden starts till Antwerp, right? So they're very much stretched out, but they're still fighting, quite a lot of fighting also at the different ports, Boulogne, Dieppe, Dunkirk, Oostende. They still have to be opened up. Some of them go quicker, some of them take a little bit of fighting. And Dunkirk is actually just surrounded and detained for the rest of the war in the end. But that's one part that 2nd Tactical Air Force has to then on that account has to divert its attention, but also is as the British 2nd Army and the part of the Canadian 1st Army moves northwards, the Germans moving backwards destroy all the airfields as much as possible. So by the time the Brits get there, or the Canadians, they still have to repair those airfields. So that means that just part of the 2nd Tactical Air Force was able to be in the area to do close air support. That's one. And the second thing we need to mention here is also, again, autumn weather.
The weather, yeah.
If there is low clouds or fog over the area of operations, you can't provide close air support. But also, if there is low clouds or fog on the airfields, there's no takeoff or landing. You're grounded. Mm-hmm. It's not like modern day planes that they can do things by radar. It's all by vision. Those of you who have seen Masters of the Air, the Regensburg raid being postponed because of fog. It's quite a good scene, actually. And what applies to bombers applies to fighter planes as well.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. No, thanks. That's a good summary.
So, okay. So what I'll do for the next couple of slides is just we go, technical on day-by-day basis using this map, and I hope it's large enough for the guests to
we can see it.
It just shows you roughly on a divisional level the sort of attacks that are being made and the troop movements. Now, I don't have a key there, but red is German, blue is British or American. If you see a dotted line, that's just troops moving. It's not really attacking. They're transported, moving up a road or something like that. If it's a what you call it, a full line or fixed line, then it's actually an attack going on. And as you can see, I'm starting here on the 18th, because on the 17th we talk about the flanking corps. Nothing happened. Only a couple of troops moving into the area, like 53rd Welsh Division, part of it moved into the area. But what you can see already on this slide, buddy, is that if you look a little bit to the left-hand side of that slide at the bottom, you see 15th Infantry Division at that bridgehead, and that's where they, what would have been the most logical place to start the attack for 12th Corps. Why? Because of the hard surface road going to Turnhout, Tilburg, and beyond.
Right. Yeah.
But because they are completely, as I already mentioned, bogged down there by the Germans, very heavily contained there by the Germans, because the Germans know how important it is to them and for their security. So a German unit called Kampfgruppe Chill, which is just what we think about Kampfgruppe, different units thrown together on the command, and this is on divisional level. Chill is actually a general, and a very capable one, I may say. But because of that, the 53rd Infantry Division, the Welsh Division, actually starts attacking, and they shift to the east. Just north of Lommel, they start getting across. In the night of the 17th on the 18th, they go across the river, a 2-battalion attack, and a couple of companies per battalion, and then start fighting their way through the defenses of the predominantly Fallschirmjäger, and one of the most well-known units in that area is actually Fallschirmjäger Regiment number 6. And you know where we that know.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, Von der Height and his naughty boys. Yeah.
Yeah, and so quite good. It's quite a good crowd, actually, kind of capable crowd. Yeah. But the Welsh forced their way through. They actually quite soon they also start bridging operations. I think that was even on the German fire. They start doing some bridging operations, and they managed to push forward a little bit into that bridgehead, which actually also forces von der Heide to fall back a little bit to the northwest, and you can actually see a bit of a red line there to the going a little bit north. And what happens then is actually very interesting, because we might argue that this attack is highly successful, because as it forces von der Heide to fall back westwards and northwestwards, it opens up a huge gap. And that's actually what you see here. You can see some German units further, a little bit north of Eindhoven. You can see a couple of German units still to the east of the 30th Corps advance, to the east of Guards Armored Division and 50th Infantry Division. But between those two lines pointing roughly northwards, there's no German units there. And I just can't help thinking that, counterfactual, of course, had the 7th Armored Division been available at that point in time, and they had pushed it through that gap, they would have had a clear run up to the canal, up to the Wilhelmina Canal north of Eindhoven towards Tilburg, which is roughly where you see that other German unit.
Yeah.
And maybe even possibly go beyond that, because the Germans had nothing much to throw in at that point in time. But as it is, of course, the 7th Armored Division is still tied down. So it all falls onto the 53rd Infantry Division, who has to move, not completely, but for large parts on foot, to basically to carry the day, and that goes really slow, giving the Germans, of course, opportunity to for other troops in. And what you actually see, what happens is that the next day, you still look a little bit to the left-hand side of fighting. 53rd Infantry Division, they start moving northwards, capture a couple of villages there, and people, of course, very massively grateful that they're being liberated. But what the Germans do, in pure panic, they throw in a very weak Kampfgruppe on a guy called Zuber in German, of about 700 men and a couple of towed anti-tank guns. That's all they have. And they just basically trying to screen in between, in that large gap, awaiting the arrival of a German infantry division, which has to come up all the way from Zeeland. And this is, of course, where the controversy starts, regarding, why didn't we move up and bottle those units completely up, preventing them to interfere for market guard. Well, that's the topic for another debate too. But that division needed still 2 to 3 days to come into the area. Was the expectation of the German commanders in that area. So they put that Kampfgruppe Zuber in, just 700 men spread really thin, basically just screening the area and hoping that they could hold off the 53rd Welsh Division just long enough for the 245th Infantry Division German to come back, to come down there very speedily. So technically just by time. And Zuber is just there in the nick of time. That's actually what happens. And seals it off. So opportunity lost there, sadly enough. And that's also what I mean. I had the 7th Armored Division with their, vehicles been there and being able to exploit that gap. Things might have looked differently. But again, that's counterfactual, of course. But it's one of these big what ifs.
Mm.
So in the meantime, on the eastern flank, the first units of the 3rd Infantry Division arrive. And normally, as you read in different accounts in different books, is normally what they would do, they have anywhere between 24 to 48 hour window to do a pre-attack reconnaissance when they're in a new area, to get to know the area a little bit, get to know, to do a recce off the ground, size up the German opposition, this, that, and the other, get their attack plans ready. But because they're already behind schedule, so to speak, they need to go in within 18 hours. That's the time limit they have. So they immediately start to do pre-planning and do some reconnaissance by daylight. And there's a very interesting story that 2 officers, I think they were from the Royal Ulster Rifles, 2 captains, forgot their names, but doesn't really matter. They actually, in order to get as close to the German, to the canal as possible, to see what the German of the defenses are across the canal that they have to attack over, they just change into civilian clothes and simply walk up to the canal, pretending to be Belgian farmers, size up the German defenses across the canal. And when they got a good look at it and a good estimation, they just walk back, no shots fired. Quite some daring. And some luck as well, I reckon. So, and it's in the night of the 18th on the 19th of September that the 3rd Infantry Division, so roughly 24 hours behind the 53rd Infantry Division, the 3rd Infantry Division also starts attacking across the canal to the east, creates a bridgehead there. Some of the units get across unopposed, others are crossing in directly into machine gun fire, and when they're still on the water. But they gain that bridgehead, are able to start bridging operations almost immediately. I think the first engineers start at 1 a.m. in the morning, opening up that bridge somewhere between 7 and 9 in the morning. That was a class 9 bridge, a minor bridge. and later that day on the 19th, late afternoon, they've got their second bridge in, which is a Class 40 Bailey bridge, so a proper one which can also hold tanks. In the meantime, O'Connor, who runs VIII Corps, is pressing his units to start moving forward as quickly as possible, knowing that he's already behind the other ones. And what he actually does is he tells the 11th Armored Division, he tells them to technically bypass the bridgehead and try to squeeze in on the route of advance of 30 Corps. Mind you, that road north towards Eindhoven is chock-a-block with 30 Corps vehicles going up and some down. And he tells the 11th Armored Division to start moving up that same road to south of Eindhoven, take place of Valkenswaard, to try to bypass the German defenses in that area and start attacking east. And that's also what you see in that also in that area. So, and last thing I wanted to point out on this this slide, of course, is that on the 19th of September, what we also see coming in from the east via the place of Helmond, which is a little bit above that, the red line above that that picture that I also put in. That's one of the Bailey bridges that the 3rd Infantry Division built. You see the 107 Panzer Brigade moving westward. That's the first attack on Zon Bridge. Which creates a lot of confusion in that area, and not just in that area, but also in Eindhoven, because there's some rumors that the Germans might attack Eindhoven. Right, so
I'm just thinking, because people are asking about intel and things like that, that since for a few months now, the Allies have been using Ultra for a lot of their planning on this broad front thing, but Ultra gives you German corps movements, German army movements. It might give you divisional information if you're lucky, but it doesn't give you information about 700-man camp groupers and even brigades. It's like the one asset the Allies had that was starting to rely on is now in this situation more or less useless, because it's giving you too high a level of information. We know where the German armies are, but what we need to know is where individual German battalions and regiments are, and Ultra doesn't give you that, does it, basically?
And even more so, even Ultra is drying up.
Yeah,
because as the Germans are approaching more and more towards their homeland, what we nowadays know is that the Germans started to rely more and more on telephone lines. They don't need those radios anymore.
Yeah. And they're reacting rather than planning. Where Ultra was useful to the Allies when the Germans are planning their own big, bold things. Indeed, it would happen later on with the Ardennes and whatever, although we ignored that, but that's another story for another day. But when they're reacting to an Allied push like this, the Germans they're not doing the same kind of communication in advance. They're reacting after we've started something. Whereas, for example, when the Allies found out about Lüttich in Normandy, the Allies found out about that 3 days or so before Lüttich was launched. Whereas this, the most you're going to find is what the Germans have started doing after they've already started doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, of course, here in the Netherlands, a lot of people that were in the resistance, they're being used and employed. And probably also people not part of the resistance, but trying to do their bit, coming in with information. Problem with that is, if you read those accounts, you quickly start to realize that Dutch civilians, bless them, I'm one of them, right? But they knew absolutely nothing about military vehicles, vehicle recognition, unit recognition. So what you, for instance, could have is that somebody had seen somewhere 20 lorries driving somewhere, and they say, "Oh my God, there is a complete German division on the move." And I'm not exaggerating this. And so, from the Allied perspective, any information that comes in there via Dutch civilians needs to be weighed very carefully.
Yeah.
Right? And especially if it involves armored vehicles, because for many a Dutchman or woman, anything that had armor and or partial tracks was a tank.
The tank, just like the news today. Any armored vehicle, it's a tank. A tank, you know.
Even if it's a Speerwagen, the German version of the half track, it's a tank. Right. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, because people are asking about the resistance and the information. And basically, my take is that pretty much from Tunisia onwards, the Allies have learnt that you can get good information from the locals, but you can also get false and shit information. Best to kind of not ignore it all, but take it all with a big pinch of salt and rely on your own intelligence, aerial reconnaissance, and what your own reconnaissance and troops are saying. And it does mean that sometimes you're ignoring some really good information, but it means you're also not falling for bad information. It can be a good thing and a bad thing, but it was kind of the Allied policy, wasn't it, to kind of just basically not ignore, but kind of, all right, thanks, we'll go and find out for ourselves, thank you.
Now, one of the things that actually ties directly into this slide is if you look at Eindhoven as part of the 101st, of course, that's the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment. On the 19th, just to go into a little bit of 101 stuff, on the 19th, Colonel Sink had decided, because the flanking corps have not moved up, he decides to send one of his battalions eastwards and one of them westwards to widen his defensive perimeter around Eindhoven, and especially the one on the east side, the 2nd Battalion. So this is some good stuff for our Easy Company lovers here. They were part of that. They're going to a place called Geldrop. But they get and a little bit beyond, but they already start meeting and spotting and engaging some German patrols of the 107 Armored Brigade or Panzer Brigade, because they are putting their scouts out everywhere. So there are some engagement, but because the Germans coming towards Helmond and then from Helmond towards Nuenen, that's where I live. And then pushing on towards Zonbridge, especially when they come through Nuenen, there's a lot of rumor that several hundred German tanks coming through the village. Actually, it's because of that type of intelligence that filters also down to the Americans and the Brits in Eindhoven, that they decide to have the 2nd Battalion do an about face, come back to Eindhoven and take up defensive positions on the northeastern side of Eindhoven to protect from a possible German attack into Eindhoven from the direction of Nuenen. Germans have no intention of doing so because they're going for Zonbridge, but still, this is part of the reason why they make that move. The Americans is partly because of the Dutch, Dutch intelligence reports. So there we go. Okay, let's move forward to the 20th of September. So 20th of September, what you actually see is that on the left flank, it's just the 53rd Infantry Division, the Wells Division, still fighting, trying to push the Germans. But the Germans have quite a stroke of luck now, in my opinion. That German infantry division that had to move up all the way from Zeeland and was expected to not arrive for yet a couple of days. They somehow managed to get them in the next day, and that was quite lucky because Zuber actually plugged that gap. But with just 700 people, he couldn't hold off forever. So again, almost by the skin of their teeth, the Germans got their reinforcements in of the 245 Infantry Division, being pushed a lot to go forward. Guys completely exhausted because they also had to walk quite a bit and were in transport already for days before that. So anyways, they get that in the nick of time. But what you see on the eastern side actually is that the move that O'Connor envisioned by swinging around the 11th Armored Division a little bit north and then go east is paying dividend now on the 20th. So what actually happens is that the 3rd Infantry Division, they start pushing a little bit east and northeast from their bridgehead. But the 11th Armored Division basically has, I wouldn't say a clear run, but they encounter German resistance, but at several key villages and other places, but swiftly start running across them. And end of the day, the 11th Armored Division already reaches a canal going roughly north-south. That's the dark line that you actually can see, behind which you can see the word gulch or comfortable gulch, KG gulch. They reach that line, clearing up most of that area. And the only thing that the Germans can do is fall back. So it seems that they have the breakthrough that they are looking for. In the meantime, of course, the 20th of September, several things happened to the north. You know, the Germans again launched an attack on Zon Bridge, but the Americans and the Brits also launched several counterattacks. One of them is fighting here in Nuenen, famously depicted in the HBO series of Band of Brothers, of course. But it's, you know, it's within the context of a wider battle that happens. So that German armored unit is still in the area and needs to be dealt with. The Americans and the Brits are not capable. They are capable of pushing them back a little bit that day on certain in certain areas, but not completely. So, for instance, my village Nuenen was still on the German in German hands by the end of the 20th, even though the Germans were falling back in the process of falling back during the night of the 20th to 21st of September. So quite a bit of progress on the eastern flank. Hardly any, if any, on the western flank. So the Germans on the western flank, as you can see, is also a little bit further north of Eindhoven. It's still pretty close to the to what the Americans call Hell's Highway. Now, on the 21st of September, what happens is the most significant things that happens there is again on the eastern flank, and that is that elements of the 11th Armored Division seize a crossing near the town of Aston, Zomeren and Aston. Those are two villages just across the same, with the canal in between, technically. And Aston is on the eastern side, and elements of the 11th Armored Division are able to push the Germans back, seize a bridgehead there, which will become massively important in the upcoming days, because that allows actually the 11th Armored Division to start pushing into, you know, that part of the Netherlands, not being bothered by that canal anymore. What they also do, they actually take over the fighting near Nuenen, a little bit to the north, and so a little bit outside my village towards the Nat village. The entire day there's very heavy fighting in that area between elements of the 11th Armored Division and the German 107 Panzer Brigade. An episode which we can arguably call the only tank battle in the Netherlands during the Second World War, only proper tank battle. On an interesting side note, by the way, Woody, one of the units that is involved here are the 23rd Hussars of the 11th Armored Division. And if you read some of the accounts of people serving in that unit, there was one guy who wrote, it was only in Nuenen that we encountered German tanks since we left the Seine. And then he goes on and he said, we really didn't believe that the Germans had any serviceable tanks left. And all of a sudden, they find themselves in the midst of a ferocious fight, which could be, in terms of intensity, not in size, but intensity, it was just like the fight that they went through in Normandy. So quite the wake-up call. I always say, you know, the war hasn't ended yet. The Germans still pack some punch. So what you also see on the 21st of September is that the 15th Infantry Division has now been relieved by the 7th Armored Division, in as much that actually one of their brigades stays in that area where they were and is now under command of the 7th Armored Division. So it's basically 2 out of 3 brigades of the 15th Infantry Division that move up a little bit northwest of Eindhoven to take over there from the Americans. And that all was made possible because the 49th West Riding Division had arrived in the area. So you can see them in the bottom left corner. So that allows the 7th Armored Division to swing east, and it allows the 15th Infantry Division to move up north. Right, and as I said, taking over from some of the American airborne units in that area. But still, the Germans are pretty much entrenched there. And even with the combined efforts of 2 infantry divisions, the front line doesn't move much in that area, if at all, even though there's very heavy fighting going on. 22nd of September, what we see then is that the Germans actually they are holding the Allies back on the left, on the western flank, but they are losing a lot of men and material as well in the process. And what the Germans decide is that they need to shorten their defensive lines. So what they decide is, by the end of the 22nd of September, by the end of the day, the Germans in that part of Belgium, so that's the left bottom part of that map, will withdraw and take up positions behind what they call the Turnhout Canal. And it's not actually them that will do that. Some elements of Kampfgruppe will do that, but mostly it's another German infantry division, who's, I think the 719th, that is. They will take over basically command of that area. Kampfgruppe will be withdrawn, including the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, which is now becomes part of the, or already has become part actually of Kampfgruppe, even though they're mentioned here as another unit, as an independent unit. Well, what we also see is that the Germans are already starting attacking on the northern side at vehicle from 2 sides, from the west and from the east. And what actually happens is, as the Germans are pulling out of Nuenen, or the Nuenen area, the armored brigade, this 107 Armored Brigade, becomes part of a unit called Kampfgruppe Walter, which is also consists of different other units, and they start attacking vehicle from the east southeast, and they will be at the end of the day also reinforced by an SS group called Kampfgruppe Heinke, which is still in the south. And as this all is going on, the 11th Armored Division is very much busy to enlarge their bridgehead near Asten. And what that actually means is that, you know, as specifically it means a couple of things. It means that the next day, the 49th Infantry Division on the western flank can surge forward because the Germans have pulled back that night. Which also means that the 7th Armored Division is then completely released, because the 49th actually takes over the entire stretch. But also on the eastern side, what you can see is that the 11th Armored Division is still pushing out of their bridgehead there. And as they are pushing out of that bridgehead there, they actually threaten the rear of Kampfgruppe Walter, which is still trying to get to Veghel, but now also being counterattacked, not just from the area of Veghel itself, but also the part of the Guards Armored Division has come back south to also help push back that German Kampfgruppe Walter. Lastly, what it also means is that the 50th Infantry Division, who until then basically how to put this, provided security at several parts of the lower part of the corridor, is now completely released. One of the brigades already went up to Nijmegen, but the 2 other brigades start moving northwards, also let's say northeast of Eindhoven, to take over that part of the front and assist the 8th Corps in clearing up the eastern flank. So that also means that by this stage, 50th Infantry Division is being transferred from 30 Corps to 8 Corps. So that 30 Corps can focus on Nijmegen and beyond, and VIII Corps has control of all the units on the right-hand flank in the south.
And just to jump in for a second, because you've been talking and I haven't given you a break. If, and it's a big if, the whole point of the garden part of Market Garden was to bring the Germans out, split them up into individual camp groups, have them do their usual counterattack to respond to Allied movements, this would be working quite well if that was the intention. But that wasn't ever the intention of Market Garden. The Market Garden is to push that thrust off towards the Ruhr, blah, 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 blah. Because at that point right now, as an attritional battle, it's not a total disaster, but it's just not getting anywhere near what the whole point of the operation was about. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting analysis that you give there. Yeah, and I would agree. And you know, it makes me wonder, what if they had waited a little bit and get up more supplies, get the troops.
When Mark Calhoun was on a couple of weeks ago, he was saying by this point of the war in Europe, the Allies are having to decide between what are their greatest intentions: liberating people, covering ground, or eliminating German troops that are ahead of them. And you've got to, because you can't necessarily do all three at the same time. And at this point, as has always been the case since Normandy, as every day goes past, the Allies are destroying German units. Now, the Germans are also having their own effect on Allied units. So that part is still always happening. The Germans are beating themselves up trying to stop this. And as you would explain, entire German units, just like British units, are unable to field troops after Market Garden. But the actual gain of territory, that thrust into the Ruhr, is no. So I'm starting to understand that Monty's whole 90% successful, to some extent, depending on what your criteria are, it sort of works in that you have brought Germans out and you have knocked out German troops, but that wasn't what Market Garden was sold for. That's kind of where my thinking is going right now.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, I think any general with any given operation will say that it's 90% successful. No generals will say my operation was went completely tits up and made a mess out of it.
Well, England were 90% successful in the Euros, and they got to the final and got beaten, but they were beaten.
And also, if you look at, for instance, you know, the objectives on D-Day. How many of the if all the planned objectives is 100%, how much percent did they actually have at the end of D-Day? It wouldn't be 100.
No, exactly.
I think it would be, you would be hard pressed to find any battle. There might be some, but they will be very difficult to find where you know, they meet 100% of the objectives within the time that they expect them to gain them. You know, because plans always work well on paper, but not on practice.
Exactly. No, this is fascinating stuff. I love it when these discussions make me think as well. They raise as many questions as you've explained lots of things that I didn't know, but you've also you've opened up ideas that will make me think about things later, which is the best kind of show, because I'll be pondering things like your 7th Armored comment earlier. I'll be lying awake about that in 3 hours time. So thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Always glad to help you, Woody. No, but also let's also be honest. You know, liberating Western Europe is, even though they call themselves the Army of Liberation, you know, at least that's a word I think Eisenhower coined a couple of times, but that's a very political statement. It's not a statement of fact. The liberation per se, it's not an objective. It's a consequence of defeating Nazi Germany, the German army, and that's what they want to do. They want to bring the German army to battle, to, you know, completely defeat them, and as such end the war. So yeah, by any means possible. And attrition, you know, I remember that when I was doing my MA Modern Military History, that was this article by, I can't remember which historian it was, academic historian, an article or book, and he argued that, you know, if you look at most wars are actually wars of attrition.
They are.
it's the last man standing, you know, and a very few wars that are not wars of attrition. And when you see wars that are not wars of attrition, there generally is a huge disparity between capabilities of two armies.
Yeah.
And
no, I mean, Robin Pryor, the Australian historian, makes that point a lot, and I agree with it. But I also think that sometimes us historians, we pull out attrition as the good thing to come out of it when the actual main objective has not been successful. So we go, oh well, you know, we didn't do what we were supposed to, but look at how many German tanks we destroyed on the way. Attrition is kind of it's our last resort excuse that we give, although it's very, as you say, it's essential. Paradoxically, you have to attrit the enemy, and as you say, wars are all about attrition, but I feel it's also kind of a hollow excuse, you know.
I get what you mean.
It's fascinating. Like the Hurtgen forest attrits the Germans, but at an incredible cost.
Yeah. That's a rabbit hole. That's a good rabbit hole there.
Anyway, back to you, and we'll plow on through to the end of this.
23rd, the 23rd. What also is very significant, what actually start happening, is that in that part in Belgium where you have the 4th Armored Brigade and the Belgian Brigade Piron, as I mentioned earlier, just in defense, they are of course opposite some Germans, and of course they do some fighting. There are some skirmishes and some smaller battles there, but nothing directly tied within the plans of Operation Garden. But what you can see is that the Germans in that area, they need to fall back, because the 3rd now Kampfgruppe Heinke, this SS Kampfgruppe, has moved north and is near Wegel. There's a gap that the Germans can't plug that well, meaning that the Germans in that area, which is a Fallschirmjäger unit, actually part of Fallschirmjäger Division Erdmann, they need to fall back towards the next canal, opening up, basically stealing that area also to the Allies. So that's also a movement that you can see, not by direct fighting, but by, they just need to save their skins. That's technically what happens. But, just keep an eye on the 11th Armored Division, because that's the main thing of importance here. And you can see that the opposite number there is it's mainly, there's some other units in the area. It's mainly the 180th Infantry Division, or the Germans actually dub it Division Number 180, because actually it's a training division. So a lot of these units are not fully trained, probably. And even though they do actually not a botched job, they do actually quite well, I think, considering their capabilities, or their assumed capabilities, I should say. But they can't keep 11 Armored Division units at bay forever, right? So the 11 Armored actually breaks through and starts moving towards the next villages, and the only thing that the Germans can do is then pull northwards, 180th Division northwards and a little bit eastwards. And that has grave consequences for the Kampfgruppe Walter, which is trying to get to Wegel and capture or destroy the bridges there. But this is then what we see on the 24th. The 11th Armored Division is pushing northwards now. They created some kind of a gap there, seizing a small town called Deurne, and that actually forces Walter to send part of their Kampfgruppe south to plug that gap. That's the dotted red line that you can see there, while they are also under attack by units from the 50th Infantry Division, which are now swinging a little bit out, flanking them to the north and trying to push them back. So Kampfgruppe Walter now, with including those German tanks of the 107th Panzer Brigade, are now in grave danger of being completely bottled up there. And once that happens, they will be annihilated. There's no question about it. And also what happens a little bit on the western flank is that the Germans, launched their last big attack on the Hell's Highway. A couple of those attacks are contained, but one small German battle group of about 200 Fallschirmjäger on a guy called, oh my God, now the name eludes me. Major. Well, never mind. I forgot his name. He actually slips through in between the lines of the 501 and the 502 Parachute Infantry Regiment, and settles in a woods north and south of Hell's Highway, including some self-propelled anti-tank guns, some Jagdpanzer, and some towed 88mm guns. Blocking Hell's Highway again. That happens in the afternoon of the 24th. So, and that comes to a head when on the 25th, you can actually see that little red dot there, a little bit on the top of that map over there. And this is technically the last day of Operation Market Garden, even though there's fighting all over the place. Most significant fighting takes, of course, place on Hell's Highway, where this German battle group is being attacked by elements of the 7th Armored Division, at least later in the day, but predominantly by the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, who by the end of the day are launching a regimental attack, all 3 battalions on the attack, to dislodge about 200, by that time 200 minus Germans from a woods. Complete regiment. And the Germans, even though they pushed them back a little bit to one side of the road, the Germans still retain control over that road during the night of the 25th and the 26th. And it's that battle group that will escape, almost completely surrounded, back to their own lines, as at the same time that the Brits, recross the Rhine at Arnhem. And what we see on the eastern flank, the western flank is completely stuck, as you've already noticed. That doesn't move much. The German 245th Infantry Division has to fall back a little bit, but technically that entire flank is become stuck. And what significantly happens in the area of on the right hand flank, 8th Corps, is that the Kampfgruppe Walter, now so under pressure from different sides and in danger from being surrounded, other German troops have already pulled back behind the next canal. It's all a matter of canals in that area. And Kampfgruppe Walter is in the afternoon escapes by driving first northeastwards and then southwards, chased hot on the heels by elements of the 11th Armored Division. And that actually brings Kampfgruppe Walter to a small Dutch town called Overloon, now very well known for a big war museum, but also very well known for the more history buffs among us for the battle at Overloon, which of course is a direct consequence of the fighting on the flanks. So actually, you could argue Overloon is kind of a continuation of Market Garden. So there we have it. Market Garden ends, and the Battle of Overloon was about to start.
Wow. Yeah.
So I hope this gives a little bit of an overview of, the complexities, the problems, and the operations that happened on each flank, even though we're not able to go too much into detail of, small unit operations. But I hope of viewers.
Yeah, definitely. And you've just made me want to invite you back to cover Overloon. Now that's what we're going to do. Any more slides while we're done? Are we finished with slides? Is that the last one?
Yes, this was the last slide, mate.
Well, brilliant stuff. And as I say, it's given me food for thought, and it's filled in that area of the operation I think all of us, except for yourself, are weak on, and that we've all come away with the move of this idea of this single road and everything happening up this single road. And you've realized it's a far wider operation with bits that are going well, bits that are going less well. And of course, as always, the Germans having their say in things. So absolutely brilliant stuff. You've taken time out of a busy touring season. You're off with more groups later this week. So we'll let you go, folks. I've got a rare Sunday show. We've got our Australian historian Philip Bradley is coming on to talk about the Americans crossing the Moselle River, or in Moselle, the 5th Infantry Division, about this time 80 years ago. And we've got our Paris show, which was postponed with Patrick Bishop on Monday morning. So there we are. Edwin, it's a pleasure talking to you. We will meet up again at some point and have a few beers at some point, I hope. And brilliant stuff. And if you have ever considering touring this region, then Edwin is a fantastic guide. As you have realized, the link to his touring website is in the description below. You can check him out there. He does Arnhem tours and Battle of the Bulge tours, and basically anything in that part of the world you do, don't you? First World War as well?
No. I'm not
just
very
a
good.
proper one.
I know it happened.
Yeah. It's too much to do too. But thank you, Edwin. Thank you, viewers, for your fantastic questions, and thank you, other viewers, for answering those fantastic questions. This is Paul Woodadge for WW2TV saying I will see you all again on Sunday. Cheers, everybody. Bye.